There are rivalries in sports where two athletes face each other directly, and then there are rivalries where circumstance keeps them just far enough apart that no clear answer ever emerges. Dorian Yates and Lee Haney belong to the second category. After more than 3 decades of measured statements and carefully worded responses, the man known as the Shadow is now speaking more directly about that period than he has before. 2 men, 14 Mr. Olympia titles between them, 1 contest in 1991 where the scores were tied after prejudging, and a retirement that came quickly enough that bodybuilding followers have been debating its circumstances ever since. Whether Lee Haney was a champion who left the sport at its peak, or one who departed ahead of a challenge that could have complicated his legacy, remains a point of disagreement. So does what Dorian Yates, now 63, actually thinks about the man who stood between him and his first Olympia title. Not the version that appeared in magazine interviews, the more complete one. Behind the expressed mutual respect, the archival social media posts, and the restrained public comments, there is a more involved history, one that includes disputed information, near confrontations on stage, psychological pressure, and a rivalry that each man remembers winning or coming close to winning, depending on who is speaking. Both are referring to the same competition. The 1991 Mr. Olympia took place on September 14th at the Walt Disney World Dolphin Hotel in Orlando, Florida. Total prize money was $250,000. The stakes extended well beyond that figure. Lee Haney was competing for his 8th title. A win would equal his own record, place him among the most decorated competitors in the event's history, and move him beyond any previous benchmark. No one had won 8. The pressure to deliver was significant. That year, a British competitor largely unknown to American audiences arrived to compete. Dorian Yates had been winning consistently in European competition. Earlier that year, he had taken the Night of Champions in New York, which qualified him for the Olympia. Those who had seen him train or compete described his conditioning as exceptional, not simply in terms of size, but in definition and density that distinguished him from the other competitors in the field. When prejudging concluded, the scoring reflected something uncommon. Dorian Yates and Lee Haney were tied at the Mr. Olympia. After prejudging, in front of the bodybuilding world, Haney won the contest by 3 points. Across multiple judging rounds with a full panel of judges over several hours of competition, the margin was 3 points. That difference separated Lee Haney, cementing his place as the most decorated Olympia competitor to that point, from Dorian Yates beginning a new era 5 years earlier than it ultimately arrived. Yates dominated the muscularity comparisons. His mass and condition were already at a level the judges had rarely seen. But Haney had something Yates couldn't fully match: the stage presence, the maturity, the proportional refinement of a man who had stood on that stage 8 times before. He knew how to win. He knew the judges. He knew himself. When it was over, Haney accepted the trophy and made his announcement. He was retiring. The greatest winner in Olympia history, at 31 years old, walked off the stage and said he was done. He went fishing, as he put it, and said he was happy to leave it to the youngsters. Dorian Yates looked at his second-place trophy and said something that has held up well over time. "This was the last time in my career where I wouldn't be placed first." He meant it. The question that followed, and has continued ever since, was whether Haney's retirement was as straightforward as he made it appear. Timing matters, and the timing of Lee Haney's exit, coming just as the man who came within 3 points of beating him was entering his prime, was something bodybuilding fans were not prepared to set aside. The theory has been stated plainly and repeatedly. Lee Haney retired not because he was ready, but because he could see where things were heading. He had narrowly held off Dorian Yates at his final Olympia. The scores were tied after prejudging. Yates was 29 years old and would return in 1992 in better condition. Haney, according to this account, recognized what was coming and stepped away before it arrived. That narrative has been persistent enough that Haney addressed it directly. In a 2022 interview on the RX Muscle YouTube channel, he was asked whether Dorian Yates had pushed him to his limit. His answer was immediate and unqualified. "I don't think he was pushing me." He elaborated. Yates's physique, while impressive, had not yet fully matured at the time they competed. The era Haney competed in demanded more than mass. It demanded the kind of conditioning and proportional excellence associated with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Robbie Robinson, and Frank Zane. In that regard, Haney maintained he still held the advantage. His waist-to-shoulder ratio was superior. His muscle maturity was at a level Yates had not yet reached. "It takes time to get there," Haney said. Dorian's physique hadn't fully matured. He stated without hesitation that he would have won a 9th title in 1992 had he chosen to compete. No qualification, no uncertainty. He was definitive. Now, let's hear from the other side. In a 2019 interview, Dorian Yates offered a different account of that contest. He noted that in the mandatory poses, the direct muscularity comparisons, widely considered the most objective portion of the judging, he had the advantage over Haney. The overall result favored Haney based on presentation, experience, and posing routine, which are the more subjective elements of competition. Yates's position was that, measured purely on physical comparison, he had won in 1991. "If you took away the posing round," Yates indicated, "I would have won. 2 competitors, 1 contest. two entirely different interpretations of the same result. Both accounts hold up within their own frame of reference, which is part of why the debate has never been resolved. Haney represented the more complete package at that point in time. Yates carried the more muscularly advanced physique, though not yet refined across every category to the degree required to take the title. Both assessments can be accurate simultaneously. What is not in dispute is what followed. Haney retired. Yates returned in 1992, and what unfolded over the next 6 years made the 1991 debate largely academic. From 1992 to 1997, Dorian Yates did not lose a single professional competition. In a period that featured some of the most gifted physiques the sport had produced, Kevin Levrone, Flex Wheeler, Sean Ray, Nasser El Sombadi, Yates won the Olympia title every year without exception. His 1992 physique marked a clear shift in the sport's standards. The improvement was not simply one of size. The conditioning he brought to that stage introduced a level of dryness and muscular separation that observers began describing as granite hardness, a combination of mass and density that made the comparisons against other competitors look uneven. Judges adjusted their criteria. Competitors reassessed their preparation. The sport's benchmarks moved. That period is now widely identified as the beginning of the mass monster era. Yates did not arrive at it by accident. He developed his physique at a gym in Birmingham, largely unknown to his competitors, guided by a training philosophy that ran counter to the prevailing methods of the time, where conventional bodybuilding training emphasized high volume, large numbers of sets per muscle group, extended sessions, pump-driven work. Yates trained on a different model. He had been studying Mike Mentz's high-intensity training philosophy, which held that maximum muscle stimulation was a function of intensity, not volume. His approach involved 1 to 2 all-out working sets per exercise, taken to absolute failure, with 6 to 10 total sets per muscle group. Sessions were short in duration but demanding enough that recovery became the limiting factor. He referred to the method as blood and guts. The results were difficult for the sport to accommodate because they raised questions about the efficiency of the approaches most competitors had built their careers around. The challenges were credible. Kevin Levrone, one of the most naturally gifted athletes the sport has seen, placed second multiple times and pushed Yates as consistently as anyone. Flex Wheeler, regarded by many as the most aesthetically accomplished bodybuilder of his generation, could not take the title from him. Sean Ray, precise and well-proportioned, was equally unsuccessful. Over those 6 years, Yates combined physical capacity with a level of psychological focus that his competitors were not able to match. His 1997 final title came under conditions that would have ended most careers. 3 weeks before the contest, he tore his tricep, not strained, but torn. The kind of injury that sidelines athletes for months. Dorian Yates competed anyway, won, and then announced his retirement. Not because he was forced out, but because his body had paid a price he was no longer willing to accept. By 1997, the damage had accumulated across his entire career. A torn bicep earlier, the tricep at the end. Years of maximum intensity training on a frame pushed well beyond conventional limits. He left the sport with 6 titles and an undefeated record across 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia competitions, having permanently altered the direction of professional bodybuilding. When Ronnie Coleman arrived in 1998 and extended the mass-driven template further still, the debt to Yates was widely acknowledged. Coleman walked through a door that Yates had opened, and the door before that, the one Lee Haney had held for 8 consecutive years, was the one Yates had spent years preparing to reach. From the moment a voice in a detention center gym told him this was where he belonged. On the subject of his relationship with Haney, the public record has grown considerably since Yates reached his 60s. The full picture is more layered than either straightforward admiration or straightforward rivalry. When Yates shared footage from the 1991 Olympia on Instagram, their only direct head-to-head on that stage, he captioned it, "My debut Olympia 1991, and praised Haney directly. He acknowledged Haney's stage presence, the maturity of his muscle development, and noted that Haney was poised to win his 8th title. He stated that the right man won, a measured assessment given everything that followed. He also offered something more personal. He described watching Haney guest pose in England years before they ever competed, and what that experience meant to him. He was an inspiration to me, big guy and a family man. I had my son Lewis, so he was an inspiration in that way as all the other guys were single. I'm a fan basically now." That is not press release language. It is the reflection of a man in his 60s looking back at someone who shaped his thinking before they were ever competitors. The bully story was eventually resolved. Dorian has been clear that whoever gave him that information before the 1991 Olympia was wrong. When he and Haney finally met, Haney was friendly, professional, and gave him no trouble. The stone face Dorian showed him in return was built on a false premise, and Dorian knows it. None of that, however, changes the undercurrent that runs beneath every interview either man gives on the subject. The hypothetical, what would have happened in 1992 if Haney had competed, has no clean answer, and both men know it. Haney believes he would have won. Dorian's 6 dominant titles suggest otherwise. With no way to settle it, the debate continues in exactly the way both men have privately chosen to leave it. There is genuine respect between them. That much is not performed. But beneath the respect is the same drive that took a young man out of a Birmingham detention center and onto the most competitive bodybuilding stage in the world. Dorian Yates does not have a mode that turns that off entirely. He probably never will. That may explain the direction his life has taken since retiring. A man with that kind of internal drive doesn't simply stop. He redirects. When Dorian Yates left the Olympia stage for the last time in 1997, there was little indication of what would come next. The bodybuilding world had known him as someone who appeared, won, and withdrew. He had turned down supplement endorsements and magazine opportunities to protect his privacy. He had given the sport everything and asked for almost nothing in return beyond the competition itself. What followed over the next several years was a version of Dorian Yates that would have surprised most people who watched him compete. The man who had built himself into an instrument of controlled physical performance began dismantling that identity, deliberately, methodically, and with the same focus he had applied in the gym. He took up yoga, not as an occasional practice, but daily. He described yoga and meditation as more transformative than training had ever been. Not because the gym wasn't significant, but because what yoga addressed was something the gym couldn't reach. He spoke openly about depression following retirement, about the difficulty of stepping back from an extraordinary competitive career and discovering that the career itself had been the primary source of his sense of self. Retirement in bodybuilding tends to produce one of two outcomes. Some athletes resist it, continuing to compete, prolonging the identity beyond what the body can sustain. Others step away entirely. Dorian took a third path, complete reinvention. He pursued it with the same uncompromising commitment that defined his competitive years, which should surprise no one familiar with his history. That level of commitment is the only way he has ever operated. Every generation of bodybuilding fans eventually arrives at this question, not as a casual conversation starter, but as a genuine reckoning with what the sport is actually trying to measure, and whether that standard was ever applied consistently. Lee Haney won 8 Mr. Olympia titles. His record at the Olympia was undefeated across 8 consecutive years. His physique represented the standard of his era, the combination of Arnold-era aesthetics and the emerging mass era, before that era had fully taken hold. He never competed at the Olympia without winning. By the numbers, he is tied for the most successful Olympia competitor in history. Dorian Yates won 6 Mr. Olympia titles. His professional record from 1992 through his retirement in 1997 was undefeated. Not just 6 Olympia wins, but every professional contest he entered during that period. He permanently changed the conditioning standard in professional bodybuilding, defeating a generation of highly capable challengers with a consistency that was difficult to contest. In his first Olympia appearance, he finished 3 points behind an 8-time champion. The case for Haney is largely numerical. More titles, an unblemished record, a physique that fully met the sport's criteria in his era. And critically, he never competed against Dorian Yates in Yates's prime. The one time they shared a stage, Haney was at his peak, and Yates was 29 years old, competing for the first time at that level. The argument that Yates would have won in 1992 remains a hypothetical, not a documented result. The case for Yates is that he did not simply win the sport, he altered it permanently. Every competitor who followed him was measured against a standard he introduced. Ronnie Coleman's career built on the foundation Yates established. The conditioning now expected at elite competition traces directly to what Yates brought to the stage in 1992. And in the 1991 contest, in the mandatory poses, the section most directly tied to physical development, Yates already held the advantage. He was 29, Haney was 31. The bodybuilding community has never fully resolved the comparison. Fan opinion tends to favor Haney's completeness and his win total. More analytically minded observers tend to favor Yates's impact and the trajectory his career appeared to be on. Neither position is unreasonable. They are measuring different things. What both men share, and what gives the comparison its weight, is a level of commitment that went beyond competitive success. Haney built exactly what the sport of his era required, and built it 8 times without a loss. Yates identified a different standard for the sport and drove it in that direction. Neither man was simply talented. Both were relentlessly focused on a level of performance that few competitors have approached before or since. The question of which man was the better bodybuilder may ultimately be less significant than the fact that both were exceptional in ways the sport had not previously seen and has rarely matched since. At 63, Dorian Yates does not carry himself like someone with a point to make. That period of his life is behind him. The gym where he trained is still operating in Birmingham, now relocated to the Jewelry Quarter. The physique he built has been studied, replicated, and debated for 30 years, and the discussion has not slowed. Through yoga, meditation, plant medicine, and an honest assessment of what the competitive years cost him, Yates has arrived at something resembling settled perspective. Not the detachment of someone who walked away, but the clarity of someone who reached the end of a road, assessed it, and chose a different direction. His comments about Lee Haney at this point in his life carry something they did not carry 20 years ago. Genuine regard, not the diplomatic courtesy that competitors in the same sport often maintain, but what appears to be real appreciation for a man who represented a legitimate standard, who was, by Yates' own account, a more gracious competitor than Yates had expected to find when he arrived on that stage. Whether Yates still believes he would have beaten Haney in 1992 is not a difficult question to answer. 6 years of an undefeated professional record leaves a particular kind of confidence, but the way he speaks about it now is different, less pointed, more measured, the manner of someone discussing a question that is settled rather than one that still carries weight. Lee Haney's retirement remains one of the more discussed decisions in the sport's history. Whether it was strategic, personal, or some combination of both is a question that has never been definitively answered. Haney has said he was finished and ready to move on. The timing of that decision relative to where Dorian Yates was in his development continues to be a subject of debate. The 3 points that separated them in 1991 remain a reference point in that discussion. What is not in dispute is this: the story of Dorian Yates and Lee Haney is not simply the story of two men competing for the same title. It is the story of a sport in the process of changing, one era ending and another beginning. A man who grew up in a detention center in England, becoming the most dominant bodybuilder of his generation. A man who held the top position for 8 years and left before it could be taken from him. That is the account bodybuilding has continued to return to. And at 63, Dorian Yates is giving his version of it with a directness he did not always offer during the years when it mattered most professionally.